Good evening. My name is Tim Grant. I'm your host for this evening's webinar, and I say this evening because it is evening here in Toronto, Canada, but for our presenter and for many of you on the West Coast, it's of course late afternoon, and those of you in Australia, it's the morning, and in England and Ukraine, where we had someone at one of our recent webinars, it's the middle of the night. But a big welcome to all of you for joining us. You're in for a real treat. I'm happy to say, having worked with our presenter Cate McEwan on her practice run just the other day. But before I introduce Cate, I'd like to give you a quick sense of where we're going over the next 60 minutes. Cate, once introduced, Cate will share with you her presentation of about 25 to 30 minutes. It'll be interrupted by some questions of yourselves, and at the very end, there'll be a slide where you can ask Cate any question that you want, and I will relay those to her. But you also don't have to wait till the end of the presentation. I want to draw your attention to the box in the left-hand corner of your screen, and that's called the chat box. And any one of you, if you look down on the bottom, even just below that, you'll see it says to and then main room. And then there's a blank horizontal box to the right. And you can type in a comment at any time during the presentation. You can type in a question. You can send me and say, hey, Tim, I can't hear anything. Anything whatsoever, put into that blank horizontal box and hit enter, and it will appear in the chat room for all of us to see. And I know that Cate's going to ask you to type some things there at some point, so just so you're aware of that, hopefully we'll have a good conversation going, as has been in other webinars. And at the end, beyond that question slide, we will have about 20 to 30 minutes worth of questions. Beyond that, there's a short slide of short 5 questions that I'll ask all of you to stay on the webinar to fill out. It'll take a max of 2 minutes, and those of you who do will be eligible for a free 1-year subscription to Green Teacher magazine. And having mentioned our illustrious publication, let me just say briefly that it's a nonprofit magazine that I and others have been publishing now for 20 years. It's a place where youth educators working inside and outside schools share their best ideas on a wide variety of topics. And subsequently, we have had the great pleasure of publishing 6 books. I'll put the pictures of those up on the screen in just a moment. But we're having some technical difficulties tonight, and I'm having to hold down a talk button here at the moment, so multitasking is not something I can do. Just one other thing I want to mention. We kind of came up with this idea of doing this series of webinars back in the fall, and we invited through listservs all across North America, we invited many of you and others to tell us what topics you thought were the most important and which ones we should have webinars dedicated to. And over 700 people filled a survey. And by far the most, I wouldn't say by far, but certainly easily the most popular topic was water stewardship and water education. And so I'm really excited that you've joined us tonight to hear Cate McEwan, who has a considerable background and experience over 25 years. She's been involved, she has a background in biological field science. She's been involved with many organizations over the years that I've come across her. She was a Globe facilitator and trainer. She works with a network in British Columbia called Wild BC, which is probably the largest network of environmental educators in that province. And currently she's also a director of the Gulf Islands Center for Ecological Learning in Western British Columbia. Her focus has always been to engage learners in the interconnectedness of life, developing an informed and compassionate relationship with all life, and she includes herself as one of those learners, of course. In the past 4 years, she's focused on water education projects that promote river and water stewardship both in Canada and in Mongolia. She's been recently working with teachers in an award-winning watershed project in a local school. And when not facilitating learning, she can be found enjoying music, teaching yoga, or on the water near her Salt Spring Island home in southwestern British Columbia. Please joining me in a hearty welcome, Cate McEwan. Cate, over to you.
Well, thank you, Tim, for that introduction, and thanks everyone for your presence at this webinar. The application of this technology is giving us unique opportunities, full of possibilities, and this hour that we have together is one of those opportunities of possibility not yet realized. I'd like to acknowledge all the teachers and the educators and the students that I have worked with over the years and continue to hone the craft of effective environmental learning. The examples I'm going to draw from for my presentation today, Water Literacy from Source to Sea, they extensively are from formal education, but they are easily applied to non-formal education settings. And next, please, Tim. We've got this questionnaire where we would like to know where you're from and also what your experience is in water education.
So if you can type the answers to both of those questions in that one box and press submit, that would be terrific. And we'll leave it up on the screen here for, a good 35 seconds. Unfortunately, Cate, I can't advance you to the next slide, but if you want to say anything more while people are typing in their thoughts, feel free.
Sure. In the study of water and the investigation of water, as we all know, it is a huge topic which goes into a myriad of directions, and I think that's all good. That's what we're dealing with. And so the way I approach it is systems within systems. And so taking one piece and knowing that it works on its own, functions on its own, but it's interrelated to a bigger, larger system which functions on its own, but is connected and interrelated to an even bigger system. And that can help compartmentalize some of the learning around water. But the other piece is that it's really lovely that it is open-ended, because when the learning is open-ended, then we can allow the learners and ourselves to go off into different directions of discovery. And water really engages us that way just because it is so all-encompassing in so many ways of our lives and in our studies in nature and in our being. Water literacy can be thought of as 12 principles. We'll just see up here shortly. Great, thanks, Tim. So here's some of the comprehensiveness of water literacy. Some of the areas, 12 principles here. These are from a manual called Water Stewardship, a guide for teachers, students, and community groups by McLaren, Fulton, and McMahon. In this presentation, obviously, I'm not going to look at all 12, and I'm actually going to focus on watersheds. Next, please, Tim. But it will overlap into several other of these principles of water literacy. You want to know what a watershed is? Is that coming forward, Tim? What is the water quality in the watershed? And what is our use? So I'd like you just to take a moment and define your understanding of a watershed. Oh, great. Okay, so Cate introduces people to macroinvertebrates. Fabulous. We're going to talk about that a little later. Right, so summer camp instructor. Great, Chelsea. If any of you would like to put down what your understanding of a watershed is, we'll just keep that going as we go through the slides next, please. So we want to look at the what, we want to look at the how. How do we define a watershed? How do we measure water quality? How do we measure water use? And why? And ultimately the why, next please. The why is, why would we do any of this anyways? And it's to become water stewards. It's to develop an ethic and a responsibility around water. And it's also ultimately to discover our place in our community and in the life community. So a good place to start with a watershed with young people anyway is to ask them, as already posed to you, what is a watershed? Accept their answers and in that discover what the knowledge is of the group. And so Chelsea's got a definition, an area that's fed by multiple waterways where people, animals, and plants utilize that water. A pond and stream studies and comparing the two. Watershed is an area that drains all precipitation received as runoff or base flow into particular river. Terry. My slides aren't showing for Cate. I'm not sure what that problem is. I'll go on with the game. I don't know why the slides wouldn't be showing Cate. I wonder if anyone else is having that problem. Basically, walking a watershed is just to get some kinesthetics in there, and so with chalk sidewalk very quickly, drawing out a watershed in 3 different colors for first, second, and third order sections of the river, ending in the ocean, and playing a game with the learners as water drops, and telling them when to flow and when to stop, and when you stop them, asking them questions as to where is everybody, and they all eventually end up in the ocean. They've gone down the river, and when they come back up, asking them more questions, just trying to get them to reflect on what they're doing. Next, please, Tim. It's really quick, it's fun, and it's engaging, and when learning is fun and engaging, then we're all receptive to more effective learning. After that game, a really nice piece is to just build a watershed model, and I call it a quickie watershed model because the materials are really simple. Sand, plastic bottles with holes and bins. And it can be done in the classroom if you've got bins. It can be done outside. It's group activity. It's coming to consensus. And again, it's creating based on individual understanding and individuals in a group understanding. And then when you take water in a plastic bottle that has holes in it and rain down, then you can actually see how effective your watershed is and revamp a little more, go back and change some of your watershed. You can do this anywhere. Next, please, Tim. You can do it at a shore where there's a luxury of sand and wood and rocks and really embellish the watershed. But it can be a quick activity or it can be a whole afternoon activity, and then touring each group's watershed. Get outside in the watershed and walk bits of it. Walk a whole section of it. Walk different areas and see where it leads. Here's a quote from a 10-year-old. You'd be amazed at how big the creek is. We saw waterfalls, a clear cut, a smiley stump, and lots of trees. To me, it felt like it could go on forever. And in this case, it was a creek, really fortunate. We could go to the headwaters, we could walk the whole creek, and we could end up at the ocean. But even if that's not a possibility, walking different sections of the creek or the river, ending up in a lake, seeing the different land areas it goes through, the land cover areas. Next, please, Tim. It often requires permission from private property owners, or it means you need to find crown land or a park to walk through. But the idea is to get a feel for how the water travels through the land. Another way with youth to get them engaged is to explore the watershed from the water. And we all know that youth are strong and they like to be physically active. So here we've got them on a raft, and they're working as a team. They've got to paddle that raft faster than the current down the river. They've got to learn how to read the river and know which channel to go through, where there's backwaters, so they can pull into a backwater and practice riding the raft, maybe stopping and looking at water quality. Next, please. So exploring the watershed from the water, engaging the youth really actively makes them very accessible to the learning. And there is, in fact, in Alberta, a program called River Watch. Next, please, where they take high school students for a day down the river. They have pre and post curriculum, and they get to sample, they get to experience the river as it flows through the landscape. Then integrating that learning, that experience in getting outside, either in or on the water, in the watershed, is to map it. And that's in as much a personal reflection, a personal connection to place, and implicitly one has to review in one's mind as they're making the drawing, what was the land cover. And you can see from this watershed map, there was forest, there were lots of trees, and it looks like the river comes through the town where there's all those buildings, and there was a little waterfall, which may not be so obvious to you. Next, please. But the integration of the learning and making it personal is key in how we effectively learn and how we make that passionate connection. Now, defining a watershed, in all of this, we've been learning about watersheds, in watersheds, experiencing watersheds, but there's been no clear definition other than what the question that went out and people's construct and understanding of what a watershed is. And so here I see it, Nicole and Terry, it's, they've got on that they already know that a watershed is land-based. Can I have the next slide, please, Tim? And so there, it's a drainage basin, of course. That's great. A watershed is an area that drains all precipitation received as runoff or base flow groundwater sources. So again, that's implication from Terry of water that infiltrates, that goes into the groundwater. Some is going to recharge the creeks and the streams. All of that water ends up in the same body of water ultimately, and that's a watershed. Next slide. And it's defined by the height of land. Okay, next slide would be good too. Then with that understanding, a really useful model, and the next slide, please. And so there I've just offered it, but we have a very informed group. Thanks, Tim. So watershed is a land area where all the water, runoff, precipitation, and that which recharges. Can we go back, please, Tim? But a three-dimensional watershed model has been one of the most, if you can back it up, Tim, that'd be great, a very useful, powerful, just on the 3D watershed model. So one more advance forward. Is a powerful, great, thanks, Tim, perfect. Learning method, learning approach. In order to explain what a watershed is, someone has to have that clear definition in their head to explain it to someone else. So all the learning has to be integrated and then be able to be communicated to others. This is a 4 by 6 foot watershed model. It's made out of styrofoam. It's waterproof. It's been painted. Each watershed is a different color. And the students have put on the trees and the houses. And they're demonstrating to the public how a watershed works. And they've got a plastic bottle with water in it, holes, and that's the rain. And they use food coloring, which is a toxin on the landscape. And when the rain comes down, it runs off, goes down the land into the creek, and ultimately, in this case, into the ocean. And so they get to talk to their peers and to adults about what a watershed is, which is empowering to them. But the more we say something that we know, the more it solidifies with us. Next slide, please, Tim. There's a teacher in British Columbia who makes many of these with middle and high school teachers. This is an article from Green Teacher. I've peppered this presentation with different articles from Green Teacher, which I feel are applicable to studying watersheds and water quality. And again, this is about the power of using water to engage students, and in this case, learn about land use. And as Bill Hammond, the author, says, it offers a model for creating Velcro for the mind, for experience that stimulate children to want to learn about streams, rivers, lakes, and estuaries. And it describes how easily you can make a model in the schoolyard using a garden hose and toys for creating villages and farms. Next slide, please. So we've gone from water in the watershed to land in the watershed, and a significant piece, of course, is the land use in the watershed. It defines the water quality. And another article by Joan Chad from Green Teacher, Stormwater Runoff, offers great hands-on activities where students go out in their community doing real field science, because it's in their community and it's authentic, and they look for best management practices for water runoff and land use. And they also map where there are perhaps missing best management practices and come back and do a report on that. So there's the piece of observing what is and identifying issues, but then there's the empowering piece of how this could become sustainable and where it's already working. Next slide, please. We don't always see the contaminants that go into the water system, but runoff is, of course, one of the biggest sources of the contaminants. And storm drains take a lot of the pollution from our roads into our water systems. Next slide, please. But there's also contaminants that we don't see, of course, that are in the water. And if we want to keep the learning local, which makes it most relevant, we can bring local experts in to talk about the issues, these local experts with in-depth information. So a quote from a 10-year-old student: "I've lived on the lake all my life, and I've never heard of phosphorus till now." And so the limnologist is teaching them about phosphorus getting into the water system and creating blue-green algae and the microsystems. Next slide, please. High school students can do more in-depth studies. And the next slide will show high school students in Pangnirtung in the Eastern Arctic, and they're looking at contaminants in the food web. They're sampling Arctic char and looking for organic, persistent organic pollutants. Next slide, please. This article gives some very good hands-on, well, it's a good hands-on activity in the classroom to deal with pollution. Next slide, please. Through storytelling from local place, again, keeping it local and in the context of the community, making the learning relevant. But the water quality can be measured, and some cheap parameters are pH, temperature, turbidity. Protocols can be found with GLOBE, with Stream Keepers, and Environmental Protection Agency stream monitoring. Next slide, please. Tim, we'll just go through the next slide fairly quickly. Examples of students out in the field measuring turbidity, measuring wetted channel width and depth. And again, this is field science, so understanding a protocol, implementing a protocol. You can keep going, Tim. Reading, making correct and accurate readings. And from a monitoring point of view, going back time after time and seeing the changes through the season, the changes over time. And reflecting on the findings involving critical analysis, creative thinking, incorporating, in this case, air temperature data. We'll just stop here for a moment, Tim. At a more advanced level, we looked at water quality parameters, dissolved oxygen, salinity, as well as pH, temperature, and turbidity in the freshwater creek, in the estuary, which is where the freshwater hits the ocean, and then off two different docks in the ocean environment, comparing and contrasting, and from there considering what lives in those different environments. Next slide, please. And understanding or taking on an understanding that with the changes in salinity from freshwater to the estuary to the marine, there's different life in the marine environment. And so in this case, looking at marine plankton, key to Earth's carbon cycle, key piece to the oxygen that we breathe. 75% of Earth being covered by ocean and plankton in the ocean. The phytoplankton photosynthesizing and respiring. Next slide, please. But freshwater invertebrates are more accessible to most of us, and I see some of you have quite a familiarity with freshwater invertebrates. This article from Green Teacher offers tips on keeping a freshwater aquarium in the school. On the left is an image actually of a saltwater tank. In either case, those tanks, they bring nature into the school and into the classroom, or an interpretive center, although those happen to be more place-based out in nature. Next slide, please. For students to gain an appreciation for the life that goes on in these aqueous habitats. With freshwater invertebrates, the discovery is keen and engages any age of learner. Next slide, please. Whether it's the very little or much older. So it's discovery and exploration of what's living in an aqueous environment. The study can be as simple as making a drawing, in this case of a mayfly nymph, and labeling the parts. Next slide, please. And this student was very observant, drawing the gills on the abdomen of the mayfly nymph. This is the dichotomous key, which makes for a very fun and engaging way to identify the aquatic invertebrates. And what I like about this key, which was developed by Bob Sharp, is that it has illustrations, and it's all laid out on either side of the key. And one side is invertebrates with legs, and on the other side it's invertebrates without legs. But the dichotomous key, for those of you not familiar with them, is it gives two choices. It's binary. It's either one or it's the other. And then it leads you on. So you're always answering yes or no. And if yes, then go here. And if no, then go there. And then with an identification of what's being looked at, rating the quality of the water. Next slide, please. Because there is general knowledge known of certain invertebrates which are tolerant of pollution, like midges, and certain invertebrates which are intolerant of pollution, like stoneflies in creeks and rivers. This is a diversity index example where, even without identifying the animals, they can be used to determine what is the density, the diversity in the water, and basically the more different types within a total sample size. The more diversity there is, cleaner water. Next slide, please. And the Environmental Protection Agency offers, a very in-depth study of invertebrates in rivers and creeks to come up with a score for the water being good, fair, or poor for quality of life, and that also correlates to us. It's not a measure of whether or not it's potable, of course, but poor water conditions, low oxygen levels, good water conditions, high oxygen levels, and not a lot of contaminants, and so a healthy creek, a healthy ecosystem. Next slide, please. What's key in all of this, though, from my point of view, is to get to hands-on stewardship of the water ecosystem. Next slide, please. And here's an example of a shoreline cleanup. Just about every country and region has a kind of shoreline cleanup that can be conducted. And it's basically service learning on the part of students and learners. More service learning here of creek rehabilitation. So putting gravel in the river for salmon redds, planting plants in the riparian zone being that area along either side of the creek. These hands-on activities seem to really ignite people. Again, it's being physical. They're doing something for the creek, so it's bigger than themselves. And that gives a sense of pride and responsibility and ownership. Next slide, please. That's one piece of the personal connection, but another one is just being very contemplative and quiet in nature near the water ecosystem or within the watershed. And this example of activity is taken from River of Words Watershed Explorer curriculum. It's quite powerful. The first thing to do is to go out into nature with paper, pencil, and a loupe, a magnifier, and to sit quietly and find something to look at magnified, and then to draw that. And in this case, the student's drawn tree bark. And the drawing isn't very clear, but she has put a lot of detail into it. But not to stop there, but to then come up with analogies, come up with patterns that image reminds you of. So starting to see patterns in nature, because patterns in nature repeat themselves. And in this case, the students' analogies are, mountain, trees, forest, rippling water, mowed lawn, spider web, mushroom, sandpaper, dirt, tree bark, sand, coral. Not sure what coral is. And those analogies that can be the end point, but the next point would be to use them as bones for poems. And so this student's poem is tree bark, like a spider that spun the web of life in the branches of the tree. When we do such creative work, it's very personal and soulful. It's very introspective and allows us a personal connection. So in addition to seeing the patterns in nature and honing the powers of observation, which are key piece in science, there's the introspective piece and the creative personal piece. Next slide, please. And that can go anywhere. And Leonardo da Vinci was a master in looking at the patterns in nature and seeing them repeat and incorporating them into his designs. Another poem from Sitting in Nature, fir trees, like nature's skyscrapers reaching high up into the clouds, like tall, graceful ladies, forever dancing, like tall, silent gentlemen, forever bowing, forever. So this is from being in the forest, in the watershed. And then drawings are also very contemplative. And when they're watercolor drawings and the water is used from the water nearby, whether it's a puddle or the creek or the pond, that adds a really nice element. I can't explain it, but there's something very fun that a piece of the water coloring is from the place. Next slide, please. So with these personal connections, these passionate bits developed, then I like to move to the numbers, to the how do I use water, because I feel that there's the foundation then of not just of understanding, but also of a personal connection. And so an easy place is drawing, mapping the water in the home. So finding out where does my water come from. Next slide, please. And water either comes from surface water, lakes and rivers, or groundwater from wells, and in some cases, personal homes, catchment. And then a water audit in the home. So keeping a water log as to the use in the bathroom and the kitchen, the laundry room, and outdoors daily at home. And another article from Green Teacher, Our Watery Planet by Madeline Lunny. She offers a lot of charts of water facts, and here she offers the quantity of water used, whether it's liters or gallons. So becoming aware of how much water is used, and then of course juxtaposing that with other countries and other people in other places. Next slide, please, to give it some relevance. And in thinking further of how finite water is, but by keeping it local, it stays very relevant, and then it's easier to have meaning when dealing with global issues. So what is the water use in the local watershed that we live in? Do you believe there is enough water for everyone in your town? In this situation, all but one student in the class believed there was enough water to go around. The lone student said maybe. When this local water expert came in to talk to them, he in fact informed them that there wasn't enough water to go around in the community. And that was going to be a problem in the future, and it already was a problem now. Next slide, please. But it's not to create a crisis, it's just to become informed on that foundation of personal awareness. So in looking at issues, I think it's really important to envision what you want to see more of in the world. So when investigating water issues, to keep that positive vision and to act with that vision in focus. Creating more of what we want to see in the world and staying positive on the vision. And that's my talk. So the next slide is for questions, I believe.
And thank you very much, Cate. I don't know if you can hear me. I had my own technical difficulties of my own during your presentation, but can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Great. Okay, and hopefully everyone else can too. So folks, if you would take a moment, if you have any questions for Cate, what I would suggest is do one at a time. In fact, if you have more than one, but type them into the box and hit submit, and I will retrieve them from the back office and and relay them to Cate. You can also type them into the chat box too if you like, and where we'll both be able to see them. And hopefully we'll be able to answer all of your questions in this next 25 minutes. And by the way, while you're doing that, I just wanted to make the point that we will send an email tomorrow to all of you and everyone else who registered for this webinar but was unable to attend. And in that webinar, we'll give you the link to the archive version so you can share it with your friends, but we'll also send you the information about any of the Green Teacher articles that Cate referred to so that you can have those as references in case you want to follow up with them. Let me check the back office and see if it'll just take me a minute. I'll be back in about 30 seconds to pose the first question.
I saw a comment from Terry about salmonids in the classroom, and that is a lovely program that goes on in BC that is very powerful with students, where the eggs are incubated in a tank in the classroom, and the students measure the temperature units, and then once they hatch, once they are swim-ups or aled, and then release them into the creek as fry, and they treat them all as their babies. It's quite powerful to see these students being so caring of the salmon babies as they release them into the creek and wish them well on their journey.
Cate, while I'm waiting for some more questions I actually don't have any questions at the moment, so as I'm waiting for more to arrive in the back office here, I will tell you that in answer to the very first question on the first slide, where is everybody from and what experiences you had, we had quite a rich set of answers. And I can tell you that there are people from Arizona and California in the Southwest to Prince George, British Columbia, and then northern British Columbia to Ontario and New Jersey on the east side of the continent, and Pennsylvania and North Carolina, Wisconsin, and many places in between. So we've got quite a collection of people. And I'm going to see if I can, I think what I'll do is I think I've thought of a way that I can go back and forth and tell you share with you a little bit of the activities that some people have been involved with, just see if I can try something different here. Okay, well, I hope you can hear me now, because I can't see the screen that you're all looking at, but Kristen from Arizona has been involved with water festivals. Ashley in Ontario is involved in a stream testing seminar with 3 groups of grade 7, 8 students. Sheila in North Carolina teaches water quality. She was planning a rain garden this week with a school, and she directs a volunteer cleanup of watersheds. And Nicole in New Jersey and Pennsylvania runs a water education program for a Watersheds Association with over 1,000 students a year. So we've got a lot of people on this webinar tonight who have a lot of experience.
Yeah, fabulous experience, and it would be interesting to, hear from participants. What is your favorite resource for watershed studies, or for the people you work with? What have you seen as the most empowering? The woman the participant who works with Water Festival, and I mentioned that, and I think of watershed models and engaging the public with hands-on activities with the model. What is a rain garden? My understanding, Mar McBride is asking what is a rain garden. My understanding of a rain garden is one of the sources of heavy runoff is rooftops, and where we have residential and commercial and industrial development, the rooftops are impermeable surfaces. So the rainwater runs off in hugely concentrated amounts and can create erosion, but also means that water isn't infiltrating into the groundwater. And so there's a practice here and in other places to measure the roof area of a building and have a corresponding area of a rain garden where the runoff water from the roof goes into this holding area for the water where there's often plants, water plants, and then runs off more slowly. So Amy says my challenge is having enough time teaching the data analysis after we collect it. I usually have only 1 hour to put the data into the computer and have the students analyze it. Yeah, that is a huge problem, and it's yet so very significant. Because what I found is that's when the connection is made with the students. It's like a biologist who goes out into the field and does field research and never writes it up. So if we go out and do field work and we don't come back and look at the analysis, we don't do the critical thinking around that, then we aren't taking full advantage of making all those connections. And how do we find the time? I would say less time in the field or programming how much time you need back in the classroom. And when I was involved with a conservancy program where we were taking the grade 8s out to do the field sampling at the creek, the estuary, and the marine docks. And we had to set up our time to make sure that we got back in time. So we prioritized the time back in the classroom to analyze the data. And when I've done it with older students, it happens a lot faster. The high school students, sometimes we can do that right in the field, depending on the group of the size and how engaged they are. And with smaller students, we have the luxury of taking that time in an extra, taking another hour. But what I would say is the only way we could do it with the middle school students was to prioritize that time to give it as much meaning as the hands-on work in the field. Sorry about that echo. I think it's gone now.
Yeah, that was because I was locking talk, which no one needs to understand why that's important. But there is another question further up in the chat box, Cate from Chester, and I'll see if we can both get.
Okay, I see one from Chelsea. They have a hard time
connecting.
Is it Chelsea you
That's
mean,
it.
Tim? So I have a lot of macroinvertebrate sampling with students. They have a hard time connecting. Hard time connecting what we're doing with water conservation and stewardship. What activities do you think do the best job of getting the idea of water conservation and stewardship to stick, right? So the macroinvertebrates are the golly gee wow piece of look at all this life. I didn't know that lived in the water, and for some students it might be shockingly rude to them too to think that they share the water with those invertebrates. Connecting them with water conservation and stewardship. If you can identify the invertebrates, then you can also rate them as to their sensitivity to pollution and come up with some ranking for the water. And that could be the challenge for the students with the group identification. What do they think they would rank the water as? But you would need, and those sensitivities are available in stream keepers and environmental protection agencies, stream monitoring, and also on that dichotomous key I showed, excuse me. But getting it to stick with conservation and stewardship, I think you have to go out and do community service learning. I think you have to find a group or an agency who would like some plantings done and get the youth and the students or the younger students really involved, hands-on, whole body activity. What we saw was it was in full engagement, even of students who are engaged in nothing else. And it took all their focus and they felt good about it in the end. So almost another activity, I guess. So doing something for the macroinvertebrates, if that were possible, if you could work that in.
And Cate, Nicole's added a comment in the, and by the way, I want to invite anyone else, as Cate is answering a question, you've got another idea or another suggestion, given how much experience those of you on this webinar already have with watershed education, please feel free to add comments in the chat box in response to any of the questions that are asked. So without further ado, have a look at Nicole's comment there, Cate.
Yeah, that's such a good comment, that break it up and let the math teacher, give her the water analysis data, and then, or him, and let them deal with the analysis, the graphing of it, the looking at change over time, when was the change greatest, when was the least, bringing in another dynamic, another variable. It's easy to get weather information, rainfall, precipitation, air temperature, depending on how old the students are, overlay that on the water chemistry data as well. And the art and journaling, and the music teacher, get the music teacher in on water music. There's lots of music for water studies. Also, the arts, watercoloring, and looking at books with watercoloring in them.
And in the back office, not a question, but a suggestion from Lois Nixon. Hi, Lois, in North Carolina. Lois, by the way, is the chair of or co-chair of the upcoming North American Association for Environmental Learning. And one of the questions a minute ago asked about service learning and about water education projects as service learning projects. And there's going to be quite a big focus on service learning and water education at the upcoming conference. If you go to NAAE.org, you can find lots of details about it. Okay, we have a couple more comments there, Cate.
Yeah, I see Mars, and thank you very much for that, Mara. It's good to compare notes and see that the restoration project also worked for you. That was it puts it out there. And making the connection, which is so key. And we never know when someone's going to make that connection. So again, the more facets we can look at water in, and the more we can involve students with water in different ways, or learners with water in different ways, the more we can hope to make the connection. But conservation projects. Yes, Nicole writes, it can be modified to any age. And invertebrates, aquatic invertebrates, they are so good for any age. And you actually don't have to go to the pond or the creek. You can if you want to, and it adds a great element. But you can bring the bugs into the classroom as well. And for adults who aren't familiar with it, it often challenges them to deconstruct their understanding of insects, and then to create something new out of it. It's quite powerful, unless they're a fisher, and all fishers understand the invertebrates that live in the creek bottom.
Cate, do you have suggestions? I know we were aiming this session largely at sort of elementary and middle school, in other words, K-8, and those who work with kids outside of schools of the same age. But do you have suggestions, or have you done any work with, have any suggestions for those who work at the high school level, again, either inside or outside schools?
Well, the Bio 11 deals with invertebrates, and of course marine invertebrates are best for that because it's, or I should say Bio 11, Biology 11, in British Columbia and Canada. Now I'm regionalizing this. So at the high school level, it really depends on the school. If a school can get out to a nature center, then they can do these projects more easily. Traditional high schools are regulated by the length of time for the course for that subject. And so it's often not possible to get out into the field unless the school is situated by the lake, pond, river, or creek. So in that case, I would bring in the bucket of invertebrates and all the equipment to look at them, and the dichotomous key to identify them and work the species diversity index. The high school students have so many more skills and such a bigger knowledge base that a lot more can be done with the invertebrates rather than just the discovery, the writing, and the drawing. I don't know if that helps. Same with the watershed. Short of doing a field trip to a conservation area, I think most of what I was focusing on here really was getting out in nature to make the connection. And of course, it's more challenging if that isn't an option. Some of the Green Teacher articles that were mentioned are for middle and high school ages, and they offer activities in the classroom or just walking around the community looking at runoff, land use in the watershed, and looking at best management practices. So I think those are very applicable.
Yeah, and I would add, Cate, that two of the things you did refer to work just as well. A couple of the Green Teacher articles. One was the stormwater runoff is, of course, a big project. Measuring that is a great project for high school kids, and with a service learning tag to it. You know, doing the education in the communities about runoff is a great activity for high schools. And another one. The other one was the one you mentioned where there was a picture in that article that was prominent about some students rafting down a river. And that, again, is a high school project that has tens of thousands of Alberta high school students in Edmonton and Calgary rafting through their city, water quality testing, stopping at a sewage treatment plant, doing, testing at various stages along the river and trying to make the correlation with the various uses of the river, whether that be for sewage treatment and others. But again, great opportunities for high school kids to get engaged in some of the issues associated with our use of water.
Right. And Tim, there's more comments down. I liked Amy. She's talking about, I call it mentoring, peer mentoring, where the high school students teach sixth graders how to collect data, and they lead them on the field data collection. That is so effective to use older students to teach younger students. It's effective for the older students because they have to integrate and solidify their knowledge and their learning before they can present it to someone else. And then for the youngers, well, the older ones are their models. So they can bring in a code of conduct with it as well. And yeah, safety, someone else is speaking, maybe it's Amy also speaking of safety. For sure, big rivers, you have to watch out for that. And the Environmental Protection Agency stream monitoring manual really stresses that. I wouldn't go into any risky situations. But for Chelsea, is it Chelsea down on the Gulf of Mexico? You can make a watershed. You can do that without having much water around you, either with the garden hose in the schoolyard or just the practice with sand, plastic, and bins.
And Cate, I should just alert you, I can't see the chat for some reason. I can't see any of the new suggestions going into the chat box, so I'll need you to those if you can. And actually, what I'm going to do while we're at it is I'm going to bring up, since people are able to type questions into the chat box, and that's a great place to do it, I'm actually going to advance the slide to the end of session evaluation. For those that need to leave early, they can type into that and continue typing your questions into the chat box.
And Nicole's mentioned the Leaf Pack Network through Stroud Water Research Center in Pennsylvania. So that looks like that's got info on bugs.
Yes, they're a great source for doing invertebrate research and invertebrate sampling in streams. They're kind of the premier, some of the best resources in North America. And actually, Nicole, go ahead, Cate.
Yeah, go ahead, Tim. No problem.
I was just going to say, what I will do is, again, in the email that we'll send out tomorrow, I'll put in the contact information of that organization.
Oh, that'd be good. And Heidi, yes, you can get the transcripts from this. They'll be archived. Isn't that right, Tim? In a day or two, the archives are up and available.
Yeah, it's actually a movie. We're all making a movie, folks.
Hey.
Yeah, what'll happen tomorrow is that by noon tomorrow, usually we're in again noon Eastern Standard Time. We will we'll have an archive up on the website at greenteacher.com, and we'll send an email, as I promised, to all of you and to everyone else who registered for the session. Usually we have about a third of the people who register come to the session, and then at least as many will start viewing the archive over the next week, and of course many more in subsequent weeks. So, but in that email I'll send you the details of the Green Teacher articles, along with any other references that you ask me about in the next couple of minutes.
There's a comment of high school seniors doing multiple macroinvertebrate samplings over a 3-month period. The beauty of the invertebrates, of course, is also that they live in the water, and that's why they're such great indicators of water quality. With the chemical and physical measurements of the water quality, that's just a spot in time. It could be a flush on that particular moment. And with the invertebrates, that's really a picture of the long-term conditions of the water quality, and so a much better indicator in many ways. If all the collection has are midge larvae, then that water is very poor water quality, and if it's full of life of different kinds and in great abundance, then that is of course, indicative of really a healthy ecosystem and good water.
And while you're perhaps checking the chat box again, Cate, I'll just add further to the comment about the archive. One of the things that is often the case in these webinars is that our presenters have a lot to say, and they go through slides fairly quickly with lots of information. Please, and I encourage you to do that as the host, because you will have a chance to view the archive. If there's bits of information that you saw that you really want to go back to, hey, you can do that, and you can, like any movie, you can fast forward through it. You don't have to sit there for an hour to get that little nugget you're looking for. You can fast forward, and you can back it up at your leisure. You can watch just what you want, and so forth. So just a quick heads up about that.
Tim, this is a really fun technology for networking. So I applaud you and Green Teacher for running these webinars. I've been to one archive and sat in on one live, and now being a presenter, it's just, I appreciate all the, I'm so thankful to all the participants. Thank you for your presence. It's very powerful to network this way.
And kudos to you too, Cate. You put a lot of work into what is a wonderful presentation, and thanks to everybody who contributed their comment in the chat box. We had a pretty lively discussion, even though this host couldn't see the last 20 minutes of it. But I had more than my share of difficulties here, but hopefully that was all in the background and didn't impair your enjoyment of this webinar. So I'm going to hit the gong here and close the archive, but that means you can't still ask questions or ask comments. We'll still stick around for a couple more minutes. And please, if you haven't already filled out the end of session evaluation that's currently on the screen, please do so. We will be selecting someone tomorrow to receive a free 1-year subscription to Green Teacher. So there is a bit of an incentive for you to fill it out, but it really helps us improve subsequent webinars, and we always like to share the feedback with our presenters as well. So please take a moment to do that. Now let me hit the gong here and turn off the archive.